Hey everyone. So I want to talk to you today about a country that we don't pay much attention to, and that's a mistake, and that is Iraq. This video is going to be about Iraq. I think Iraq is about to become one of the most important stories. It really has been, but we just don't notice it enough. So let's start with a map. And this goes along with, what I was saying about a week or two ago, where I'm going to start doing videos where we just kind of focus on different countries in the Middle East and talk about where they're at right now, because there's a lot going on with Iraq. Okay, so here's our map. Here's our map. Take a look at Iraq. It's pretty clear to see on the map. Look where it sits, right? It borders Iran. It borders Turkey, right? It borders Iran here, and here's Turkey, and Syria, and Jordan, and Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait. Okay, it opens up onto the Gulf, onto the Persian Gulf, right, heading out toward the Strait of Hormuz. And it's also, it's like a bridge country. You can see that just by looking at it on the map, what the strategic importance is. Okay, so keep that all in mind. I could consider it the seam of the Middle East, right? It's the hinge between the Gulf states, the Levant with Turkey and Syria and all that, Iran. And that geography is exactly why every single time there's a major war in this region, it ends up running through Baghdad. Not a great place if you want peace and quiet. So Iraq's own economy depends almost entirely on Gulf shipping lanes, the same lanes that Iran has been messing around with, that have been the big issue heading out to the Strait of Hormuz. So when a war like this happens, Iraq is involved whether they like it or not. So that's the frame for everything that I want to walk you through now. Okay, now here's the thing that we need to understand. There are two separate storylines, important storylines that relate to Iraq, where it is politically, geopolitically. And they're two separate storylines that are building at the same time, and they've been building for over a year, and they come to a head during this war. So let's set them both up. Thread number one, story number one, has to do with the Americans, with Washington, and the militias. Of course, the Americans have had a presence in Iraq for a long time, and they want to get their troops out of there. Trump has talked about getting them out of there this fall. And he wants to draw that all down. The Americans have been, the adventures in Iraq are well known. When President Trump took office in January 2025, one of the very first things his administration did behind the scenes was they started pressuring Baghdad, the Iraqis. They started pressuring them hard to disarm all of the Iran-aligned militias operating inside Iraq. When I say all of the Iran-aligned militias, there's a bunch of them. Okay, these are groups under the umbrella known as the Islamic Resistance in Iraq. There's Kataib Hezbollah, there's Harakat al-Nujaba, there's others. There's a whole bunch of these militias. And at the time, back in January 2025, we're talking about roughly 50,000 fighters. And these aren't just guys running around with machine guns. They have long-range missiles. They have anti-aircraft missiles. And they operate largely outside of actual Iraqi state control. I say largely because there is this weird hybrid where these militias are part of this semi-governmental body that is the defense forces. It's kind of their answer to what happens in Lebanon, where you have terrorist groups there like Hezbollah who aren't part of the state, but they're kind of aligned with the state. Anyway, the way they have it in Iraq is a bunch of these militias. They actually get, I made a video about this like a month ago or so, maybe you saw it, that some of them even get their paycheck from the Iraqi government, even though they're separate militias. It's strange. Bear with me here, okay? I'll try to keep it simple. April 2025, a few months later, and Reuters reports, here, let me pull this up. Here's a Reuters report from April 2025. Iran-backed militias in Iraq ready to disarm to avert Trump wrath. So you already had some progress where some of them were like, whoa, we don't want to get in Trump's way. We're willing to fold ourselves into the state and disarm ourselves and cease to be separate militias. And according to this Reuters report, they even had Iran's blessing, and they were signaling a willingness to disarm. because, again, fear of American airstrikes. Now, so there's the thread of the terrorist militias, the Iran-backed militias, the Iran-aligned militias in Iraq that America has wanted to have disarmed and disbanded ever since Trump came into office. Nothing to do with this current war. And then there's thread number 2, which is that Iraq's own government is chaos. It's falling apart. So completely separately from this other narrative, Iraq held elections in November 2025. And the process of actually forming a government after the election got stuck. The bloc that actually decides who becomes prime minister in Iraq is something called the Coordination Framework. The Coordination Framework is a collection, a coalition is a better term, of Shiite parties that is traditionally aligned with Iran. Not all Shiites in Iraq are aligned with Iran. There are parties that are not. We'll mention that soon. I'll get back to that in a minute. Sorry, just a little cough. So the Coordination Framework is a coalition of Shiite parties that is Iran's political camp in Iraq. And they are the kingmakers. They're large enough that they basically decide who's going to become prime minister. So the same government that Washington is pressuring to disarm Iran's militias is the main power source there that's going to choose the next head of state is also aligned with Iran. Keep that in mind. So that's going to create tension. Let's fast forward to January 2026, this last January, right before the war, with everything, remember all the riots going on, all the killing going on in Iran, that period, January 2026. The sitting prime minister from before the election, who was still prime minister until the new government gets formed, was a guy by the name of Mohammed Shia al-Sudani. He steps aside, clearing the way for the Coordination Framework, this coalition of Shiite parties, to nominate a new prime minister. And they nominate a familiar name, the former prime minister named Nouri al-Maliki. And Trump did not like this. Okay, Trump was none too happy, and he put out a post about it. And here's a headline from CNN from back then, back in late January. Trump warns against Nouri al-Maliki's return as prime minister of Iraq. So Trump wasn't happy. And Trump posted publicly at the time that America would no longer help Iraq if Maliki came back into power. He called out his record from his first term in office. Think of what's going on in late January. This is late January. This is when America is building up its forces in the Persian Gulf, getting ready to attack Iran while there's still these sort of negotiations going on. It's in the wake of the slaughter of tens of thousands of Iranian citizens. And it's that period where we're all like anticipating the war that's going to come. And in the middle of all of that, Iraq announces that they're appointing this coordination framework announces they're appointing a pro-Iranian former prime minister. And Trump says, no way. So now in Baghdad, they have a domestic government crisis. They have to create a government, and America is basically vetoing it because American support is too much to turn their back on. They cannot run afoul of President Trump at this point. So this is what's going on. So simultaneously, you have these dual pressures coming from America. You have the pressure that had been going on for over a year to disarm the pro-Iranian militias and disband them. And then you have also Trump pressuring them to appoint someone other than Maliki as a head of state. Okay, that's the state of play before the war breaks out. Now, right before the war begins February 28th, less than 24 hours before it, a UN envoy delivers a message to Iraq's Shiite leadership. Sanctions on Iraq are already signed and sitting on the shelf. We're ready to implement these sanctions. And the only way to avoid them is to form a government with someone who is not Nouri al-Maliki. Then February 28th, the US and Israel launched their strikes on Iran. And in the opening salvo, they killed the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. Right? And Iraq, of course, can't stay out of this now. The Iran-aligned militias inside Iraq, who America's been pressuring them to disarm, and some of them have agreed to, right? That story. Whatever, the Iraqi militias in Iraq start attacking on Tehran's behalf. And they carry out drone and rocket attacks, and they attack and they attack all over the place. And one of the places they attack is the U.S. embassy in Baghdad. You following the story here? With all of this pressure coming from the United States, they attack the U.S. embassy in Baghdad. They attack the U.S. consulate in Kurdistan, in the Kurdish area, in the area that's controlled by the Kurds. There's an autonomous Kurdish zone in Iraq. And there's a U.S. consulate there. They attack that. They attack the U.S.-aligned Gulf states. Okay, again, think of the situation here. The United States has been telling them, don't appoint someone who's pro-Iran. Disarm the Iranian proxies, the Iranian militias. The war breaks out, and those very same Iranian militias start attacking American targets. That's what blows up then. Iraq's economy at that point takes a hit at the same time. Oil companies start shutting down production at their fields because it's not safe to operate. There's a nationwide blackout. Food prices jump 15 to 20%. The Iraqi dinar starts collapsing. And then on April 21st, so this is like a couple weeks, like a week and a half, 2 weeks after the ceasefire goes into effect, the U.S. halts Iraq dollar cash shipment after militia strikes. Now, what's that about? So Iraq, when they sell their oil to the United States, when they sell their oil, they get, or whoever they sell it to, they get some of that money. They want it in actual cash, and they get these shipments of actual U.S. cash that they use for all sorts of things. And Washington froze a roughly $500 million cash shipment of Iraq's own oil revenue, and then cut security cooperation and intelligence sharing with Iraq, because obviously they can't be trusted. They were about to appoint a pro-Iran guy. The Iranian militias are attacking American targets. And America basically says, rein in the militias, or you're going to lose American support entirely. That's April. So we're now in late April. So now both of these threads that I talked about, the chaos of the Iraqi government and the issue of the Iranian militias there, are all coming to a head. On April 27th, Wolicki withdraws himself as an option for prime minister. Soudani, the previous prime minister, steps aside, and the coordination framework settles on a total political outsider, a guy by the name of Ali al-Zaidi. Okay, let me pull him up here on the screen just so you see the guy's face. I should have pulled this up before. Let's bring this up. Here he is. Here's Zaidi. This is him. Okay, this is the guy they appoint, Ali al-Zaidi. Okay, and he's a complete outsider. He's just a total outsider. Okay, and he's a businessman. He doesn't come from the political world at all. He is a Shiite, but they sell him as a completely, outside safe candidate, and Washington is happy with him. Zaidi is sworn in May with a partial cabinet, and now you have this political drama playing out, right? There's so here's what happens. Some of the largest Iran-backed factions decide to comply with the disarmament. These are groups that have functioned for years, almost like a private army loyal to Tehran, and they hand over their weapons anyway, which is a sign of just how much pressure Iran was willing to put on its own proxies to avoid a bigger blow up with Washington. You understand what I'm saying here? So Iran didn't want a bigger blow up with Washington during the ceasefire, right? This is late April now. The ceasefire goes into effect April 8th. Trump is still pressuring the Iraqis to disarm the pro-Iranian militias, but he's also looking at the Iranians and like, hey, you better deal with your militias. So the pro-Iranian militias, a number of them give up their weapons. And then there's a guy named Muqtada al-Sadr. And Muqtada al-Sadr is an interesting guy. He's what makes him super interesting is that he is a Shiite cleric in Iraq. He's a very influential, he's probably the most influential Shiite cleric in Iraq who is not aligned with Iran. Yes, he's Shiite, but he's not aligned with Iran. He's more of an Iraqi nationalist. His entire political identity is Iraqi nationalism, that Iraq should not be a satellite of America or Iran. So, and then his own militia also voluntarily disarms. Okay, and he was trying to make an argument that the government was making, right? That no one is going to be a separate armed faction. We're all going to be part of the Iraqi state. But one of the most powerful Iran-aligned factions refuses to disarm. One of them refuses to disarm. And who do you think it is? It's a familiar name. It is Iraqi Hezbollah. Okay, Iraqi Hezbollah. They are also called Kataib Hezbollah. They refuse, and they refuse to give up their weapons. They say they're going to keep fighting. Right, Kataib Hezbollah vows to continue armed resistance as Iraq pushes state control over weapons. Okay, so we have, so some of the Iranian militias are disarming. Kataib Hezbollah is not disarming. They're not the same as Hezbollah from Lebanon, but the name is not a coincidence. They're a separate group that took the same name because they come from the same source. Iran funds both of them. It uses both of them as arms of the same regional strategy. Kataib Hezbollah also has a long, violent history of direct confrontation with U.S. forces going back years. So instead of disarming, this is hilarious. This is like the comic relief in the story. They offer to become the custodian of the weapons that are being given up by the other militias. Isn't that nice of them? So they're not going to disarm. And behind the scenes, the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Iran's IRGC, is also pressuring holdout factions to defy Baghdad entirely. So some of them disarmed, some of them they want to hold on to. So what you have at this point, if you're confused, let me simplify. You have the Iraqi government is trying to assert sovereignty. Some militias are cooperating. Iran's own IRGC is working against the government of Iraq, and their main militia in Iraq, Kataib Hezbollah, is refusing to disarm and saying they're going to fight on. That brings us to where we are now. So three things, it's really four things. There are four things going on simultaneously that are kind of colliding, and I want to walk through each one of them. So first, Reuters came out with a report the other day, sort of a bombshell report. This was just a couple weeks ago. Iran's Revolutionary Guard set up covert Iraqi cells to attack Gulf neighbors. Check that out. Small groups, it says here in this Reuters report, 10 fighters each, deliberately kept separate from the Iraqi militia command structures so that the big name factions can maintain deniability. Because that way there can be attacks carried out, but none of the Iraqi militias are doing it. These cells have carried out drone attacks on Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. Iraqi authorities are investigating whether one of these attacks on May 17th caused a fire at the United Arab Emirates Baraka nuclear power plant. Okay, so we have a drone attack traced back to Iraqi soil hitting the nuclear facility in the UAE. And Iraq's government is saying, hey, you know, it's not us. And, you know, well, like the question is, who's responsible? Oh, it's really Iran. It's a covert cell. So that's what Reuters reports. Now, the second thing that's going on. So that's one thing that's going on is that you have that Iran is apparently using Iraqi soil as a launch pad for attacks. In other words, rather than launch drone and missile attacks during the ceasefire period from their own soil, they're sending their guys into Iraq to attack these countries from there. Okay, now, the second thing that's happening is the Khamenei funeral. Now, why does that matter to Iraq? Well, it's a multi-city, multi-day event, and part of it passes through Najaf and Karbala. Karbala is the site of the original battle from the founding of Shiite Islam, and some of the Khamenei funeral is taking place in Iraq. And this is a very interesting thing, meaning think about that. Some of Khamenei's funeral is taking place in Iraq. And that's really a power move in a way. It's the Iranians saying this isn't just Iranian, this is the whole Shiite world, right? There's a lot of politics surrounding this funeral. Good idea to go over to the Israel 365 news channel. I just interviewed Dr. David Wormser today, and that conversation is going up on the Israel 365 news channel. It might be up already. It's going up at some point later today if it's not up yet. And we spend a good chunk of that conversation talking about the funeral, the Khamenei funeral, and the implications of what took place there. I'm also going to make another video about the funeral later on, but it's actually pretty important. Anyway, so what do you have now? You have Iraq, which is actually simultaneously hosting the Khamenei funeral or part of the procession. And meanwhile, the IRGC's own militias are launching attacks from Iraqi soil, while at the same time, the government is officially trying to disarm the Iranian militias. Okay, this is chaos. The third thing that's happening is there's a deadline. And it's a deadline that, of course, we're going to have to watch as it comes closer. And that deadline is September 30th. So a few months away still. This is just from a couple days ago, from June 30th. Iraq gives pro-Iran militias until September 30th to dissolve. So this is that new prime minister, Zaidi, trying to gain control of the situation. Okay, so Prime Minister Zaidi proposed September 30th. And the deal is that the U.S. will pull its remaining troops out of Iraq completely, but only if the militias are fully disarmed by that point. Fat chance that that'll happen. And that's the trade, right? American withdrawal in exchange for Baghdad actually controlling its own territory. This means that September 30th is the moment that we'll find out whether any of this, the compliant factions, the holdouts, the IRGC pressure campaign, whether it actually adds up to a real state monopoly on force. Hint, it won't. Like this, doesn't this start to remind you of Lebanon, where you have a government claiming that it's going to disarm the Iran-backed terrorists and they really don't have the capability to, or maybe the will to? Whatever. September 30th is a date that we're going to watch. It's a few months down the road, but we'll keep that in mind. The fourth thing that's going on, and this is the carrot that goes with all of America's sticks. We've talked about their sticks, warning about sanctions, get rid of your militias, right? Don't appoint a pro-Iran guy as your prime minister. But in mid-June, Trump's special envoy to the area, Tom Barrack, met with the Iraqi prime minister and pushed new direction in bilateral ties. Now, what's this new direction in bilateral ties? Well, he basically promised him a lot of goodies if he comes into the American orbit. Okay, and very, very tasty treats he offered him. Chevron negotiating to develop 2 major Iraqi oil fields. Starlink cleared to operate across the country. American oil companies that had pulled out for safety reasons coming back in with U.S. security guarantees. A memorandum to rehab a major pipeline route to the Mediterranean. A new terminal plan to import natural gas for Iraq's power grid. Okay, these are all massive undertakings, basically saying we are going to help you become a prosperous, stable economy, but you have to play ball. You have to be in our orbit. And Barrack also confirmed, the big one, that Zaidi is heading to the White House in mid-July, meaning any day now. I checked again today, there's no date yet set for this meeting, but it's supposed to be in the coming weeks. Zaidi, this new prime minister of Iraq, is supposed to go to the White House for a meeting with Trump. So Baghdad now has a real concrete picture of what they will get if they can manage to comply with American demands and exert their sovereignty and get rid of the pro-Iranian militias and actually become a sovereign nation. They're going to get Western investment. They're going to get American companies. They're going to get a functioning economy. And they're going to be in the American orbit. Okay? Now, let's zoom out. And let's go back to that map from the beginning. All right, let's go back to that map. Right? Here's Iraq, here's Syria, here's Lebanon. And we know what's going on in Lebanon, right? We have talked a lot these days about what's going on in Lebanon. It's the exact posture, the exact same posture from Washington in Lebanon is playing out in Iraq. Now, the players aren't identical, but it's the same thing. What is Washington doing in Lebanon? They're pressuring the local government to disarm Hezbollah and finally assert real sovereignty after decades of answering to Tehran. Just like Iraq, it's a different country, there's different militias, but it's the same American strategy. It's the same American strategy. What is America trying to accomplish? These are not two unrelated headaches, Lebanon and Iraq, putting out fires, whack-a-mole. That's not what it is. This is the deliberate American policy. Remember that the American demand of Lebanon to disarm Hezbollah, to make a commitment to disarm Hezbollah, goes also back to the beginning of 2025. That's when the new Lebanese government made that commitment that they would disarm Hezbollah by the end of the year. This is not about the current Iran war. Meaning the demand to disarm the Iraqi militias and the demand to disarm Hezbollah in Lebanon come at the same time from the White House. And now they're pursuing these things. So we have what's happened in Lebanon over the last few weeks with the New Deal with Israel, and Lebanon fighting for its sovereignty and telling the Iranians that it's none of your business. They're trying to do the same playbook in Iraq. And there's actually a real method to this if you think about what the Americans are trying to accomplish. This is one deliberate policy applied to both ends of Iran's reach across the region. They want to weaken and dismantle Iran's axis, its regional axis, piece by piece. Lebanon, Iraq, even while the bigger question, whether the regime in Tehran actually falls, that's a separate question. But even if it was what the Americans are doing is, even if the regime in Tehran somehow survives in a crippled form, they want to dismantle the entire network, the axis of Iran's power across the region. So they want, and the strategy they're using, I'm not saying it's the best strategy. I'm not saying it's going to work. I'm just telling you what they're doing. What they're doing is they're trying to get these countries, Lebanon and Iraq, that are completely dysfunctional, to take their sovereignty. They're giving them all sorts of incentives, and they want them to come into the American orbit so that in this Middle East, that is, when the dust settles on all of these conflicts that started on October 7th, 2023, when the dust settles and there's a new Middle East and Iran is no longer a power player, if the regime falls, that's the best way to do it. But in whatever Middle East emerges, they're basically looking at these countries and saying, which side are you on? Who are you with? Are you with the jihadists or are you with the American axis? That's what they're doing here. Right? Iraq is at a fork in the road. Either it achieves what it has never had. Well, since Saddam Hussein, you could say that was sovereignty, which is a state monopoly on the use of force, right? That's an essential component of sovereignty. Or it continues to be a government on paper with armed factions loyal to foreign powers operating within it. Now, Iraq has only had any measure of stability because the Americans have been there. But the Americans don't want to be there. So let's think about what all these outcomes, these potential outcomes mean, given where Iraq sits on the map. An Iraq that succeeds in cutting off these Iranian-backed militias, it's not just a domestic Iraqi win. It closes off Iran's land corridor. For years, Iran used Iraq as the connective tissue of its entire regional network because of everyone that it borders with. The route that links Tehran through to its allies in Syria and Lebanon, it runs through Iraq. If you sever that and you pair it with a Lebanon that disarms Hezbollah, then you've cut off both ends of the bridge that Iran has relied on for its entire regional strategy. Right? You're dismantling that corridor. That's a fundamentally different Middle East. It's a Gulf-facing, US-aligned Middle East, doing business with Chevron and hosting Starlink, sitting right on Iran's western border where Iraq is, instead of serving as an extension of the Iranian regime. The alternative, if they don't go the US route, right? Is the Iraq and the Lebanon that we already know, which are governments that exist on paper, where the real power is in Tehran and in these terrorist militias. And in that version, both countries stay exactly what they've been for years, which are these chaotic places that are constantly just staging grounds for whatever games Iran wants to play in its fight against Israel and the U.S. And it's right in the middle of the region's most important crossroads, and it means that there's still, all the weapons going across and all the problems that go with that. So that's what's at stake here. It's not just whether one country, Iraq, gets its act together. Iraq is not a backwater; it's the center of everything. Anyway, so September 30th, we're going to watch that date. We'll see if Iraq can accomplish anything by then in the disarming of these militias. Don't put your hopes up. The similarities to Lebanon are interesting. The difference here is that Iraq is actually Shiite majority country. And there's a very strong alignment of the population with the Iranian regime, which is a little different than in Lebanon, where you have a Shiite minority, a very powerful one, but it's a minority. So that's very different. But the next few weeks and months will tell us a lot about where Iraq is going. We'll come back to this story as it is relevant. All right. God bless.